is up, fellas, and welcome to the live Q&A on NAGPRA with me, TheGoob. Before we get into the content, I do have two quick disclaimers to go over. My dog's been struggling this week, and he's asleep right now. He's doing well, but if he starts struggling again, I'll have to end the stream early. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's the explanation if it does. The other disclaimer is that, and I'm sure this will disappoint a few people, if your questions are about specific artifacts, I don't know the answer, right? I do not have knowledge of every single Native American artifact in the world and what its ultimate fate is. I won't be able to answer those questions. Similarly, if your question is about a gallery, what was removed from a gallery, is a gallery open or closed? My recommendation would be to contact that institution. And I'll give you an example why, because these things are in flux since this update has come into play. This whole journey started for me because I contacted the Ohio History Connection. I was on a phone call with them and I said, hey, I've been trying to study Native American artifacts or Native American culture, and I've been trying to view their artifacts, and I haven't been able to find anything online. Do you yourself have a good online gallery, or can you recommend a good online repository for me to study? And the response I got was, yeah, no, you're not going to find anything like that due to the federal regulations. So even in a case like that, where I know that the Ohio institution or the Ohio History Connection does not have an online gallery, turns out that they do now. So 2 weeks ago, when I last checked, they actually did have an online gallery of Native American artifacts up. So these things are kind of in flux. They're changing. I don't want to give incorrect information. So if that's your question, my recommendation would be to contact them in a neutral manner. Don't be like, hey, what are you bastards hiding from us? Just, ask them reasonable questions and see what they say. However, if your questions are, how is all of this working? What has already occurred? What might occur in the future? Why is this happening? How does this, fit into the bigger picture? How is this connected to other agendas and power plays? Those are all things that I will do my best to answer. You can ask your questions in the chat and I'll try and address them. I can only view top messages because I'm using StreamYard. So if I'm ignoring your question, just type it again. I'm not ignoring your question. It's because I didn't see it. And also feel free to use the pinned comment to call in. You can call in with just your voice. You don't have to show your face if you want. You can be anonymous. You can ask whatever you want. It's all good. So while I wait for the questions to roll in, I guess I'll try and establish some important elements for understanding NAGPRA. And, as much as I would like to just address NAGPRA and leave politics out of it, that's impossible. This issue is very intimately entwined with the woke agenda, right? And over 99% of archaeologists lean left. That doesn't mean that over 99% of archaeologists are radical woke activists, but it means that over 99% of archaeologists in America lean left. So say 10% of archaeologists are the truly radical woke activists. That other 89%, they are unable to speak out against it or take a stand against that or say, hey, I think we're going a little too far, because the standard operating procedure of the woke is comply or die. You either do what we say or else. And this is very well understood. If you ever want to see an archaeologist foam at the mouth, simply mention Elizabeth Weiss's name. She is the only active archaeologist that has enough balls to speak out against the madness that is NAGPRA. And they came at her extremely viciously. Jordan Peterson's story got a lot of attention, and rightfully so, but her story is at least equally as crazy. What they did to her is at least as out of line as everything that happened to Jordan Peterson, but very few people are familiar with her story, but archaeologists are. And if you want to see them see, just say their name, say her name, right? So because over 99% of archaeologists are left-leaning, NAGPRA can only move in one direction. It can only get more extreme. It can only get more woke, and more history can only be erased. That's just the way this operates. And that's an important, fundamental understanding if you want to try and understand NAGPRA. Yeah, I guess you could show just your face and not your voice, but it wouldn't be too useful. Does using LiDAR for extended periods give superpowers? Yeah, it allows you to see through the jungle. I think that's a superpower. What are the actual punishments for violating NAGPRA? Will armed men show up to my front door? There have been very few, very, very few, if any, attempts to like jail people over NAGPRA violations. It potentially could happen, but pretty much if it's getting to that point, you're not just violating NAGPRA, you're also like violating other laws. So you're not really going to jail for NAGPRA, you're going to jail for the other laws you violated. But financial punishments, social shaming, um, things like that are the punishments. I do hope I get some questions because I really haven't prepared a presentation for this. I've given many presentations on this before. If you are new to NAGPRA and you don't know what I'm talking about, I do recommend checking out. I actually don't even know the title of my own video, but it's the beige toned with the yellow text on it thumbnail, and it's where I'm reading a paper that I wrote about NAGPRA. That gives a pretty good overview. I also linked a paper that's a lot more thorough. So if you want a more in-depth understanding and you really want to understand like the legal complexities and what this law is doing, the paper I linked down below is by far the best coverage of NAGPRA that I have found to date. It's way better than my own coverage in my own paper, honestly. Highly recommend reading that, and I'll actually take a look at that if we don't get questions. I'll take a look at some of the highlights from that to emphasize just how insane this law truly is. Kind of. Yeah, it kind of is, because it's not directly and explicitly written into this update that diffusion is illegal now, but due to all of the implications that are written into the law now, it has made, I don't see how it hasn't made the study of diffusion illegal, because part of this update is that uh, unaffiliated no longer exists. They have to affiliate everything that's found to a modern tribe. And so the underlying implication of that is that anything that's found is automatically Native American, right? So there's some other things in there as well that add to this, but from what I understand of NAGPRA and from what I've seen of its implementation, yes, it kind of is illegal to say that now. Not literally, you're not going to get arrested for saying that. But the study of diffusion does seem to be a banned study now due to NAGPRA. Great question. How would I summarize NAGPRA for normies? I would say that over 99% of archaeologists lean left. And because of that isolated echo chamber of only left-leaning ideas and people and ideologies, archaeology has reached a point where they now broadly view archaeology itself as a colonial sin, as a racist, oppressive act that is harming people, and a human rights issue. And so, because they cannot literally go back in time and erase what was done and change what was done in the past, all that they can do today is erase and destroy and dismantle the archaeology of today. And so that is what is happening. And I realize that's a very radical statement to make, but this is a very radical law, and archaeology has been captured by woke radical ideologies. Yeah, there are. So Canada, Australia, and the United States, I would say, are the current big three where this push has become very radical already, where the erasure of history is happening not just in isolated incidents, but broadly speaking. And so that leaves the rest of the rest of the world, right? But it is slowly spreading to the rest of the world. I recently posted an article about Egypt where people are trying to start the movement in Egypt, so that they're essentially trying to bring NAGPRA to Egypt. And you know, European countries are slightly different. You've got like the UK, which Ireland, from my understanding, the indigenous people of Ireland are still largely the indigenous people of Ireland today. The same with like Mexico. Mexican population, like 95% of it is indigenous, right? So there's not necessarily a need for that same kind of law in Mexico when the like with NAGPRA, they are taking information that was publicly accessible and they are reclaiming it, right? They're going, this shouldn't be accessible to anyone else anymore. It needs to be owned and controlled. Jax, please kindly fuck off. Please. Thank you. And so that doesn't really apply to Mexico when the people are the people, right? And they're all the indigenous people. You don't really need to reclaim that from the public anymore because they are the public. So it does vary from country to country. I think it's entirely possible, but that's not NAGPRA related. Um, I don't think I have. If you want, you can message me on Twitter or you can email me at thegoobinator@gmail.com if you want to share some information about that. Absolutely not. There is nothing protecting against it. And the way that this new update was written, and I'll highlight this later when, questions slow down if they do, because I've got a highlight from that article linked down below, and a rule guideline from the SAA that quite explicitly shows that not only is there no protection against political activism hijacking it, it seems to have been deliberately written so that it can be hijacked by political activists. And it was written by a political activist herself, Deb Haaland, the former Department of Interior secretary. She was a Lagunta Pueblo native herself, and she is an activist herself. David Kelly supported a Russian mine paper and was fired at La Brea tar pits and never got a job in the US again. Why? Because he did not back the American archaeologist in charge at the time. Yeah, that happens a lot, unfortunately, that type of thing. And that's like what I'm talking about earlier, right? With I don't know the exact breakdown within archaeology. I know that 99%, over 99% are left leaning. Of that 99%, which ones are like truly woke radical activists, I don't know. But I do know that whatever portion it is has captured the rest of the archaeologists, right? The rest are not able to speak out against it or disagree with it or even question it without fear of very serious reprisal. So yeah, that kind of thing, unfortunately, is pretty standard in archaeology. Very possibly. Very possibly. My other dog is not deaf. Jax is not the deaf dog. I've got two dogs. But yeah, my deaf dog cannot hear me. I don't. I don't think he knows. The vast majority of people do not know. The more that I've interacted with archaeologists, it honestly seems that most archaeologists don't even really know the true scope and scale of what's happening with NAGPRA. And I know some of it is them just lying, right? Because erasing history isn't a good look. So you make an accusation that archaeologists are trying to destroy history and they get rather defensive, right? So I do believe that a good portion of it is just lying, but I think a good portion of it is also genuine ignorance. So no, I do not expect Trump to know. I do know that there are people who are working to raise awareness within his cabinet and with him himself. I don't know how successful these have been. I don't know. I don't know many of the details, but I do know that there are efforts Elizabeth Weiss herself is making an effort. There are other people in other groups that have made efforts, but I don't know much more than that. Um, so that was, I was discussing NAGPRA with a Middle East archaeologist recently, actually, and I brought up Israel. Because I know that in other parts of the world, it's not as extreme as it is in America and Canada and Australia. But I did ask. I said, how does this compare to the Middle East? Like, are they as sensitive about these things over there, and specifically like Israel? Because I know obviously there's a big conflict over there, and the conflict is kind of who was here first, who does this belong to? At least partially, that's the conflict, right? And so I imagine that there is a lot of sensitivity around archaeology, and yes, there is quite a bit of uh, kind of tiptoeing around in Israel. But generally speaking, in the Middle East, he confirmed that no, they don't care. Like, it's science, it's information. They want to know the history. There's not these super fragile. I'm struggling to find the right words, but like you're not afraid to just investigate the truth in the Middle East. You can go do a dig and report on what you find in the dig, and not worry about losing your job and having your life ruined by woke activists. I think what you're trying to ask is, why do natives get so emotional where, like, they think that other people shouldn't be allowed to talk about this subject? Um, Honestly, I actually do have a lot of sympathy for the Native American perspective. I think I understand it decently well. And the world is a very unfair place. Like, what happened with the Native Americans was not fair to the Native Americans. They did have their land stolen. They were displaced. Largely, most tribes were displaced in like Trail of Tears types events. It was pretty brutal. It was quite unfair. I can completely understand their perspective. I can understand why many Native Americans are anti-American, why they are anti-archaeology, why they don't want this stuff you know, on display. They feel like it's disrespectful. I don't agree with it. I think that, the world is an unfair place, and you unfortunately just kind of have to accept that it's unfair. And not everything can be made right, unfortunately. Um, so I understand where they're coming from, but yeah, I think it's not um, like the most grounded approach. Obviously, this is America, even though Native Americans might wish it wasn't. They might wish it was still their land. This is America, and we do have freedom of speech. And so, yeah, you are able to share your opinion about it. But there's a lot of archaeologists. I've been told many, many times by many archaeologists that I have no right to have an opinion about this, that me even wanting to have an opinion about it makes me a horrible racist person. And from the archaeologists, that's absolutely baffling. From the archaeologists, that's an insane, ridiculous, indefensible position. From the natives, I do understand where they're coming from. I disagree with it, but I can understand it. What can be done to help? Great question. Raise awareness, right? This needs to reach a broad audience, because the only way to stop this, like I said, NAGPRA only moves in one direction. It only gets more extreme. More and more history only gets erased as time goes on. So how do we stop this? Because they're not going to stop it themselves. Public outrage, right? In the same way that Jimmy Corsetti, Bright Insight, got the trees removed at Gobekli Tepe, the same type of thing needs to happen with NAGPRA. People need to know what's happening. They need to be offended by what's happening, and they need to raise a stink. That is the only way this stops. I guess theoretically, it could be stopped through legal means, through Trump and the DOI, but even that, I really don't have much hope for. It would be great if we could get this law, reverted back to its original 1990 version, or updated in some newer, more logical way. But I don't even think that would put a stop to what's happening with NAGPRA, because you still have over 99% of archaeologists leaning left. You still have the woke radical elements within there that can't really be disagreed with. So they would just keep doing this on their own, even without the backing of the federal government. But yeah, awareness. So help spread this to people like Jimmy. He is aware of this issue. I mean, I don't know to what extent he's aware of it, but he has interacted with some of my posts. So I know he at least is aware of it on some level. But I have a very small voice. I've been working very hard to get this news out. I haven't made the biggest impact all by myself. Thankfully, people like East 10 Productions, Cody is now tackling this topic alongside me. He has started interviewing people about NAGPRA, and he's dedicating a lot of his time to this. So that's really encouraging to see, but we need even more of that. We just need to spread this and raise awareness. Absolutely. And it is already happening. This newest update to NAGPRA is a blatant constitutional violation. It is a blatant First Amendment violation. It also violates prior laws that were on the book before NAGPRA. There's a law from like 1980 that said that any artifact found in an archaeological context on federal lands must be displayed at all times. It must be accessible to the public at all times, like within reason, like within business hours, right? Not like 24/7, but it has to be available for the public always. NAGPRA has completely overwritten that law, but also with the First Amendment, the separation of church and state. NAGPRA has mandated that these federal institutions and that these private institutions as well include Native American religious leaders who practice Native American religion. So that is not separation of church and state, and it's giving deference to those Native American religious leaders over the science, over the federal employees, over everything else. So it is demanding that federal employees listen to and abide by whatever these Native American religious leaders state, which is a blatant First Amendment violation. There's some other constitutional issues with it as well. NAGPRA was written by the Department of Interior. I mean, originally it was written by Congress, right, in 1990, but it has been updated several times now by the Department of Interior. And this newest update is not just an update, it is a complete rewriting of the law. It has completely reinterpreted the law. And in fact, the initial intention of NAGPRA was to find a balance between science and respect for Native Americans. The Department of Interior very explicitly says that as of with this update, that balance no longer exists. Science is no longer a consideration at all. It is now exclusively about the repatriation of artifacts and remains to Native Americans, and nothing else is to be considered. So that violates, the fact that no law shall be written other than by Congress, because we now have these regulatory agencies like the Department of Interior writing law. And not only that, I've said many times that NAGPRA is just the tip of the iceberg. This is part of a much bigger issue, and I can go in a whole lot of different directions with this. I can get super big and super conspiratorial, or, I can talk about the land grabs. I believe that land grabs are already happening under this same kind of ideology in Australia. And you best believe that we will be seeing land grabs with, in America with this ideology as well. And it's just, NAGPRA is just another tool in the arsenal, right? NAGPRA is not like the end goal here. NAGPRA is not the whole picture. It's just another tool in the arsenal. This is all about control. This is all about, New World Order, dumbing down the population, all these fun things. And NAGPRA is just another tool in the arsenal, right? That's a fantastic fact. I didn't know that, but wow. Yeah. I'm just reading through chat here to look for questions. Feel free to call in, fellas. I like having a conversation about this. This topic is such a huge topic. It is such a complicated topic. It's complicated for many different reasons. One, it's bigger than just NAGPRA. Two, NAGPRA itself is huge. Three, the way that NAGPRA works is vague as hell. So all of this is really like a case by case basis. If you want to get into like specifics, there's not like a specific prescription that can be ascribed across all NAGPRA situations. They are all individual. So it gets really complicated on that. The only real generalization that I can make is that over 99% of archaeologists are left leaning, and that this only moves in one direction. This only gets more radical as time goes on. But yeah, feel free to call in and have a conversation with me. I think that a conversation is kind of the best way to cover NAGPRA, because so much of the nuance can get left out when just trying to present like the facts. But having that interaction, that back and forth, you can kind of hammer out where the gray areas are, where the confusion is, and I can address it better. Yeah, I've had pretty limited interactions with Native Americans. My conversations with them about NAGPRA have largely been met with like, "Oh, what's that?" And then I go, "The Native American Grave Repatriation and Protection Act," and they go, "Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, that's about like returning the bodies and stuff." And then that's kind of where the conversation ends, because like they're vaguely familiar with it, but they don't really know a whole lot. Um, I don't live near reservations or anything, so I haven't known that many Native Americans in my life. But I assume that, yeah, they're just kind of like most people, right? There's some radical ones, there's some bad ones, there's some good ones, and most of them are just kind of normal people, right? Yeah. So, um, good question. I don't think it's well. There are the more radical archaeologists, which again I don't know what portion of archaeology that makes up. There are some that, yes, they are just like, erase it. The white man shouldn't have access to this. The white man shouldn't be able to see this, interact with this. Like that's a sin. It's a human rights violation. This is oppression. People being able to study these people. It's a spectacle. It's a circus. And it's like, that's not, that's certainly not how I view it. I wasn't trying to learn about Native Americans as a circus. I had a genuine curiosity. I find their culture and civilization to be fascinating, and I would like to learn more about it. So there definitely are people who do have that mentality of like actually trying to erase it in that sense. But most, I believe, do think that they're doing the right thing. They do think that they're like righting past wrongs by doing this. And so I believe that's their motivation. I do believe that, like I said, NAGPRA is a tool. And so there are people that are not necessarily within archaeology, but people that do want more control over people, that want more division amongst the plebs, so that they can instate their new world order and have greater control over people. And I do believe that their agenda is to erase history. To get kind of conspiratorial here and a little out there here, I'm going to link this to AI real quick, right? So the direction we're heading with AI right now is, in the near future, we likely will no longer really use things like Google, right? We'll have AI to just give us the truth, right? Our internet experience will be an AI experience. We don't do research. We don't, search for things. We just ask AI a question and it gives us the truth right then and there, right? And that already is pretty bad, pretty nefarious, or at least has the potential to be. But when you combine that with, let's say, all history being erased, all documentation and information about our humanity's past no longer being accessible to the public, well, now you have nothing to go to except that AI truth, right? You can't go verify it for yourself. You can't go look at these things and study these things for yourself. So the only thing you can do is ask the AI and get the truth, right? And that's a pretty conspiratorial out there take. I get that, but like that is a potential future that this is heading towards, right? So um hopefully that answered your question. And the second part of that, lots of their stuff going back to them is not really their ancestors, especially since the update. The update has done away with unaffiliated. So say you find remains that are 10,000 years old. Let's use the Kennewick man as an example. 9,000-year-old remains are found. They don't have any close genetic ties to modern Native Americans. And so that was not returned under NAGPRA. It was actually repatriated. And it's not even repatriation or returning because it wasn't ever theirs. It wasn't related to them, right? But it was repatriated under an executive order from Obama. Now, today, Kennewick Man, if he were discovered today, he would have to be affiliated with a modern tribe and he would have to be repatriated. So yeah, a lot of the stuff going back is not really theirs. And on top of that, NAGPRA only recognizes federally recognized tribes. There are many tribes that are very real tribes. They absolutely exist, but they're not federally recognized. So according to NAGPRA, they legally don't exist. And museums and universities are actually prohibited from interacting with these tribes and prohibited from returning things that actually do belong to these tribes. They have to give them instead to a federally recognized tribe. And then that tribe has to ask the federally recognized tribe if they can get it from them. So yeah, this NAGPRA is a mess, and it's really, really messed up. Prominent ones. I'm not sure of prominent ones. I do know that not all Native Americans support what's happening under NAGPRA. I do believe that the majority of them are ignorant to it, like the majority of most people. I do know that some don't want this, but like I'm not really aware of any specific names like Elizabeth Weiss. You know, she's the only archaeologist who's against this. I can't really name any Native Americans, unfortunately. Yes, some accidentally clicked the back button there. My bad, fellas. Um, let me find that question again. Yeah, someone was talking to me about this recently. It might have been you, Chris. I don't know about this. It sounds interesting. I would like to learn more about that because it sounds very interesting, but it's not something I'm familiar with. A bit much with the commentary there, but I get what you're saying. And yes, and this is something that, you know, these woke solutions, how often do they actually improve the problem that they're trying to improve? Almost all the time, they make it worse, right? And so I do believe that is going to be the ultimate outcome of NAGPRA if they have their way. And I think that's definitely a tragedy. I think it's foolish, but yes, so the indigenous data sovereignty is kind of like the final form of NAGPRA. It is something that the more radical elements are pushing for, and it is a total isolationist viewpoint where literally any information that has any association with Native Americans must be removed from the public. It must not be accessible to the public. It must be owned and controlled exclusively by Native Americans. And if that comes about, yeah, it's definitely not going to improve the view that people have on Native Americans. I don't think that, generally speaking, Americans have a particularly negative view of Native Americans. Obviously, there's some people out there that do. There's people that hate groups, you know, of people no matter what, right? But yes, if you completely isolate Native Americans from America and you erase all information about them and you tell Americans you are not allowed to interact with this, you're not allowed to see this, you're not allowed to learn about it. Like, I can't imagine how that could possibly improve relations. I can really only see it deteriorating it, which is unfortunate. What did Biden do with his executive order, his order about NAGPRA? Did he know what he was doing? So I think you're asking about Kennewick Man here. Biden, Obama issued an executive order for Kennewick Man, which repatriated him and also concealed the discovery site under hundreds of tons of rubble so that no one could ever access it again for further study. And then Biden, it wasn't an executive order, but it was a command. I don't know the exact terminology, but he wrote a letter. It's no longer available on the White House website, but it's a real letter. You can find some references to it still, where he ordered all federal employees and recommended that all private employees defer to Native American wisdom. And this was a broad command. This was an in general for anything, for any issue. Federal employees are instructed to defer to Native American wisdom. He highlighted some specific industries, such as climate change, which he highlighted repeatedly and more than any other industry he highlighted. So this industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is potentially tied to the very fate of humanity, we should not be following the science. We should not be trusting the science. We should be deferring to Native American wisdom. That was an order from Biden himself, which relates to NAGPRA, but is separate to NAGPRA. And again, you know, I talk about how NAGPRA is just a small part of this, right? This does go beyond NAGPRA, right? It ties into climate change. It ties into land grabs. It ties into 1984 New World Orders. It ties into a lot of things. And again, NAGPRA is just a tool for them to achieve those ends, right? NAGPRA is not necessarily the driving force. It's just one tool in a large arsenal to try and achieve those ends. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll check that out. And I might show it on the stream, but I've got a few other things to get to first. No update on the History Homo collaboration. I did reach out to them, but they, yeah, not much to report. Okay. So I think I've caught up with the chat. If anyone wants to call in, you are still welcome to. Otherwise, I'm going to try and present a couple things here and then continue answering questions. And if there aren't, you know, I guess that'll be the stream. So this is the article that I linked. There we go. Down in the description. Highly, highly recommended. This is the most thorough. It's by a lawyer. And I've read a lot of articles on NAGPRA by lawyers because I was looking for a good one, and none of them were. They all sucked, honestly. This one's really freaking good. So she's got tons of citations and sources. She breaks it down in a way that's easy to understand. You do have to do a little bit of reading between the lines to get, you know, what because she's not outright saying like they're erasing history, but that is what she's very clearly laying out for you here. But a little excerpt from it. The 2024 regulations both encourage consultation and effectively loosen the requirements for how culturally unaffiliated remains should be identified, making it possible for institutions holding them to return them to likely related tribal groups. And if you ask an archaeologist, right, it's all rosy-posy and it's beautiful and it's doing good things, and this is what they'll tell you. But the rules also repurpose NAGPRA to give authority and control over potentially all Native American art and artifacts in museums and federal agencies to tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations, effectively requiring tribal permission for museum and institutional management and administration of historical collections. So that is essentially what we saw with the update. In reality, that is what we saw put into practice, is that this control was given over everything, and pretty much everything had to be removed due to this update. And now you see some things are filtering back into public access. Museums are reopening, galleries are reopening, but ask yourself, right? Would they really make a law that forces you to remove everything just to then put everything back? It's like, even though galleries are reopening, even though things are being returned to display, it is not everything. And you don't typically get to know what's been removed. You don't typically get to know what's missing from what used to be there. The oft repeated requirement in the rules to obtain consent from consulting parties prior to any exhibition, right? You have to have written explicit consent to display anything now. And because of the complications of NAGPRA, right? Because it's not always a clear delineation of, oh, this thing obviously belongs to this tribe. And now with the doing away of unaffiliated, where they're trying to ascribe things that have no affiliation to any modern tribe to some modern tribe now. What I'm getting at is that it's not just permission that you need from a singular tribe to display these things. It could be permission from dozens or even every tribe potentially. And if only one tribe says no, you don't have permission to display it. So the oft repeated requirement in the rules to obtain consent from consulting parties prior to any exhibition of access to or research on human remains or cultural items also raises serious questions regarding scholarly and public access to information. It is not stated whether publication or other documentation of cultural objects would require tribal permission. Again, NAGPRA is incredibly vague. It's been written so that it can be abused by these woke activists. There is zero protection against abuse of NAGPRA, and it's written deliberately so it can be abused. A few tribes have called for a halt of the publication of images of sacred objects. Some have demanded that prior publications be censored or destroyed. Going forward, would publication of objects by museums also require tribal permission? I can tell you that, yes, it has. Some museums have removed photographs of Native American objects from their online catalogs. That was broadly done at the beginning of 2024. Go away, Jax. Will tribes be able to impose restrictions of museums' republications of earlier books and catalogs? Yes. Yes, they will. And yes, they have. And yes, they are. Yeah. 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 It's pretty mind-blowing. There are some other retired archaeologists who oppose this. I've had some archaeologists reach out to me in private who have expressed that they have issues with this. Some of them are like fully in line with everything I'm saying. We line up very, very well. We see all of the same issues. We see not only the same issues with NAGPRA, but how this ties into broader agendas. We see the erasure. We see that it's only moving in one direction, right? All of that, right? But they don't speak about it publicly because they are aware of the treatment that Elizabeth Weiss got, and they don't want to have their entire lives destroyed and blown up and lose their entire career and be branded as, I mean, truly, archaeologists broadly view Elizabeth Weiss as inhuman. Like, she is an actual incarnation of the devil. She is someone who is true personification of evil. It's really insane. And I mean, I've interacted with Elizabeth Weiss a lot. I've watched many of her interviews. I've read many of her articles. I have never seen anything unreasonable from her, certainly nothing evil from her. But archaeologists are acutely aware of exactly what would happen to them if they also spoke out about this. So they don't. I've had some reach out to me privately, but they don't say these things publicly because they can't. So it is crazy, but it's also very understandable. Yeah. You're not going to get me with that one, Mr. Galunas. Yes, yes, books are being removed, and you know, um, because, again, like I was saying, this is all a case by case basis. Like, each university, each museum, they have their own policies and procedures that they create themselves. There are SAA guidelines, which I will review next, but this is all like case by case basis. So it's hard to make broad, general, sweeping statements. But the trend is more removal. Books have been removed. In time, more and more books will be removed. I haven't done that myself, but that lines up with what everything I've seen. Yeah. Yes. She was banned. So she was the curator at her university. She was the curator of the Native American artifacts. and or at least some of them, right? And she was banned. They physically changed the locks to deny her access to the building that they were being housed in, that she was still the curator of, on the grounds of um, menstruating people being unclean and unfit to interact with these artifacts. They couldn't even say women. They had to say menstruating people. They went so woke that they banned women who are in academia from interacting with their own collections, from working with their own work that they've dedicated their life to. Pretty insane stuff, right? And it's that kind of thing that you need to understand. You need to understand just how crazy things have already gotten, and that things aren't going to get less crazy in the future. They can only continue to get more and more crazy. And you need to understand that, like, let's say whatever percentage of archaeologists are that level of super woke radical activist, the rest aren't able to speak out about it. They aren't able to go, man, that's crazy, or else they get the same treatment. And so, yeah, archaeology has collectively lost its mind. They view archaeology itself as a colonial sin, a harm, an active harm done to the people, and so they have to erase it. They have to undo it. They have to stop archaeology itself. The change is not going to come from the inside. There is zero hope of change from the inside. The only way you stop it is pressure from the outside. We saw Göbekli Tepe and how that worked, right? If the public wakes up to the reality that history is actively and aggressively being erased, and the public goes, whoa, that's crazy. We are not okay with that. You need to stop. That is the only hope we have. That is the only hope we have. I do agree in the sense that, like, you can change the law, you can change, government positions and legal positions, and that's not going to put a stop from it, because internally they will just keep forging ahead on this same woke activist radical path that they've been on. But because of that woke radical activist path that they're on, there is zero hope of changing it from the inside. Outside pressure is the only hope we have. And if you think that there's no hope in that, well, then I guess it's hopeless, but I really hope it's not. I've just used hope way too many times. But yeah, we have to apply outside pressure. That's the only way this stops. Yes, I mean, I don't know that exact number, but yeah, it's definitely less than 1%. Absolutely. Um, no one knows about this. No one knows about this. And I've it's been both exciting and disappointing to learn that some people do know about this. There's some certain people who are more aware of this than I thought they were, and that was exciting to learn. It's also disappointing to learn because they haven't covered it yet. They haven't chosen to cover this yet, and I don't necessarily think they will choose to cover this in the future. And I think because they're afraid of the woke mob. They are also aware of how Elizabeth Weiss has been treated. And the only reason I haven't gotten that same treatment, and I have actually to a degree, I have had some woke hate mobs attempted to be stuck on me, but they didn't really take. And I think that's just because I'm a very small voice, I'm a very small channel. But if some of these bigger channels did pursue this story, they would absolutely have woke hate mobs stuck on them. And so I think they choose not to cover it for that exact reason. And that's really disappointing, because if they don't, it's very likely that less than 1% of the population will ever be aware of this until it's too late, and until literally everything is gone, and then it's too late at that point. Okay, I'm going to try and share something else here. Give me a second to pull it up. I don't think I have it open yet, but there it is. And share this tab. Give me a moment. Feel free to call in, fellas. You are welcome to call in. There we go. Okay, yeah, here we go. So this was sent to me by an archaeologist who does agree with my position. And he went through and highlighted some of the things that stuck out to him. So we'll take a look at some of the stuff he's highlighted. This is, by the way, the Society for American Archaeology implementation of revised NAGPRA regulations fact sheet. So while this is all handled on a case-by-case basis, these are the guidelines that have been put out by the SAA for all of these institutions to hopefully follow. Requires deference to the Native American traditional knowledge. Kind of crazy that now any Native American with a position of authority within a tribe can just overwrite the science. It requires deference to the Native American traditional knowledge. It requires action by institutions that receive federal funds. And actually, it requires action by literally any entity in the United States of America. This update was written so broadly that they had to add an emergency addendum to specify that it wouldn't apply to individuals like you and me, because it originally was written so broadly that it otherwise would have. But it does apply to all private businesses, all corporations, et cetera, et cetera. Now, not literally all of them. There are some very small exceptions, but it applies to any entity in the United States that has ever accepted a single cent of federal funds. And after COVID, that is effectively every single entity within the United States. Those federal dollars that we were receiving, maybe they weren't so innocent. Maybe they had a broader objective. And again, I think NAGPRA is only a part of that. But yes, and the Department of Interior was asked, are you going to apply these laws to corporations and private businesses? And the answer that they gave was not yet. We are going to focus on the institutions that have already traditionally been affected by NAGPRA. We're going to, paraphrasing here, but erase everything from them first. And then once we've accomplished that goal, we will move on to private businesses and corporations and other entities. Incorporates and accommodates Native American traditional knowledge. Again, a violation of the First Amendment because it's dictating that Native American religious leaders must be a part of these federal processes, of these, governmental processes. Requires institutions to obtain free, prior, and informed consent prior to allowing any exhibition of access to or research on human remains or cultural items. Cultural items has been expanded to mean everything in effect. So it requires institutions to obtain free, prior, and informed consent for anything to be done with anything Native American. And that consent can be withdrawn at any time. It can be altered at any time. And, like I was saying, because of the way that unaffiliated has been changed and the way that affiliation has been changed, pretty much any tribe can just step in now, at least theoretically, and go, hey, we don't want you interacting with that. We don't want you displaying that. We don't want you studying that. And these institutions kind of just have to go, okay, at least potentially, right? Cultural affiliation makes clear that cultural affiliation can be made based on both a clear and reasonable connection of shared group identity. I'm sorry, that's just not a sentence. It says both, and then it doesn't even, whatever. I didn't make these highlights. I'm sure this is saying something interesting here, but that just isn't a sentence. That's just not even a sentence. Clarifies that a museum or federal agency is required to report on holdings or collections that may contain NAGPRA human remains and cultural items. Of particular note is the accumulation of one or more item for the forensic purpose as well as for temporary purposes such as exhibition. I don't think that's necessarily the most impactful statement here. Yes, Native American traditional knowledge. Native American traditional knowledge is to be considered expert opinion. Now, what is Native American traditional knowledge? It is anything that a member of a tribe who has a position of authority says it is. And some interesting stuff here. When it comes to Hawaii, they don't have traditional knowledge. I'm not super well versed on this, so forgive me if I misspeak here. But I think it was like King Umehameha who discarded all of that. He did away with all of the Native American traditional knowledge. He went, we're moving on. We are moving on. We're getting rid of our history. We are discarding our traditions, and we're starting over. So there is no Native American traditional knowledge in Hawaii. There is no Hawaiian traditional knowledge. It's been done away with. So, by default, like tradition can only be what they say it is today. And in effect, that's also what we're seeing with other tribes around America. I'm going to scroll through chat again real quick, see if I'm missing anything good. Yep, questioning history is a dangerous thing to do. Yes, 10 people. It's good to see. It's very good to see. Yep. Yeah, that actually is an interesting delineation to be made there, but they did specify that citizens are not applicable, and the DOI specified that corporations are. Yes, the consent is constant. That's a good way to put it. It's not just free, informed, and prior consent. It is constant consent that's required. Yes, very true. Why should they? Like genuinely, why should they? Why should that be applied to any group of people? I don't see anyone who's raising a stink over Roman history and insisting that modern day pagans have absolute control over their history. And I think everyone would recognize that as a ridiculous position. So why should indigenous have complete control over their history? It's also, is it their history, right? If let's just say that diffusion did happen, that someone made it to America before Columbus. Should the default be that that is Native American history that belongs to Native Americans? Because under NAGPRA, it is now. Um, what about Kennewick Man? Kennewick Man had more close relations to South American natives than it did to North American natives. Why should North American natives who have no connection to this have absolute control over that and what happens to it? So yeah, demanding that I explain why they shouldn't is frankly a confusing standpoint to me. Why should they? It's humanity's history. It should belong to humanity. It should be studied objectively by anyone who wants to study it, including Native Americans. Native Americans can become archaeologists. They can get involved. They can run museums. They can do any of these things and get involved. So can white people. So can black people. So can foreigners, right? And I don't understand why there should be this separation of, oh no, none of you can interact with any of this. It's ours, right? And especially because, is it theirs? Is it? And then what about within the tribes? How do you determine which tribe gets it? Like, yes, we had an affiliation process that's been done away with now, but that was not perfect. The affiliation process was not perfect. There was often times where it's not clear who this should and shouldn't belong to. So how do you even create such a system? And why should there be such a system? I honestly don't understand that perspective. I'm not trying to be like anything here other than I genuinely don't understand that perspective. It doesn't seem to be logically consistent. Right? And that's a part of that. How do we know it's their ancestors' site? And especially if, which this is a part of NAGPRA now, they have the ability to shut down excavations. They have the ability to shut down research. So if something is found that is potentially not Native Americans, but the Native Americans by default have the ability to say, well, you don't get to look into it any further. How do we even determine if it's theirs? We're giving control by default to things that might not even have any affiliation with them. So I don't understand. It's very confusing to me. I If you want to reword that question, you're welcome to, and I'll do my best to answer it. But I'm not really sure what you're asking there. I'm sorry. Yeah, and please feel free to call in. The link is pinned at the top. History, myths, and legends. You're welcome to call in, and I'll do my best. Yeah, and I have an anecdote from a bar back when this is over a decade at this point, and so the details are fuzzy. Um, I've talked about it previously on the show, but there was an archaeologist working at a site where it did appear that it could have been Welsh and not Native American. And the more that they dug down, the more it seemed to appear that it could have been a Welsh burial. And they got to the point where they had extracted skeletons, had them in a facility where they could do DNA testing on them, and were ready to do the DNA testing. And the tribe that was in control of this, and this is well before this update, right? This was over a decade ago. But the tribe that had control over that site, right, had the affiliation with that site, stepped in and said, nope, you're going to rebury these. There's not going to be any more excavation on this site. There's not going to be any further testing done. And that was that. And I mean, that's just an anecdote that I got, but it seems, at the very least, it seems that that is possible to happen. Something along those lines easily could happen with the way NAGPRA is set up. But yeah, I very, very strongly recommend reading the article that I have linked in my description. It's way better than my own article. Honestly, my article, I was trying to make it short and sweet and understandable to a very broad audience. So my article is great for that. If you have absolutely no idea what NAGPRA is and you want to get a very quick understanding in like less than 5 minutes, I think my article is the best resource in that regards. But if you want a more complete, more thorough, more in-depth understanding with lots of citations and sources and the reasoning and the logic really more spelled out, the article in my description is by far the best article I've come across, and I highly recommend it. Yeah, no problem, man. I gotcha. I know we have some disagreements, but I think we both can still have nice, reasonable conversations. So no problem. Yes, and that is absolutely a part of this. Like I said, I wish I could present this just as facts and leave politics out of it, but that's not possible. Politics are deeply, deeply intertwined in this. Politics are like the driving force in this. The woke ideology is what it is. Um, so yeah. All right, I got a call, so gonna go ahead and take it. How's it going, Ricardo?
Hello, how are you, Goop?
Doing
And
well.
yeah, we do have our divergencies in this, but I think in the end we have the same objective. That is to allow science to move on, allow history to move on, allow answers to be obtained, and that people gain awareness of the indigenous cultures. And I think I learned something today from what you were saying. My point is, when I've made that question, my point is, from what I've seen, the sites that are not at this moment controlled by the tribes, these archaeologists that suppress history have control of those sites, and they hide material from those sites, right? For instance, Vince Barrows, the case of the Mount Pigash is one good example of that,
Right.
where the artifacts disappeared, and there is no control from the natives, right, on this subject. So, and perhaps if there was, we could have a better research if we have people that, instead of worrying and suppressing material because it doesn't fit a timeline, they were studied as they should. So that was my. I know this is a very
No,
confusing and
I
blurry
get where
thing.
you're coming from, and you're not wrong, or at least you're not wrong about the fact that yes, archaeologists are hiding things as well. You know, again, I think that giving any group of people that unilateral control is not a good thing, right? In your case, the archaeologists have the unilateral control, and bad things are happening. In
Sure.
other cases, Native Americans have that unilateral control, and bad things are happening. I don't think that unilateral control and the secrecy and the withholding of information should be a power wielded by anyone. I believe in the democratization and the public access of this information. I think that excavations should be open sourced, not the literal excavation itself, but whatever is found, right, should be open sourced. It should automatically by default be given to the public, and that's not what we see from the Native American aspect, and that's not what we see from the archaeological aspect. So there's absolutely issues on both sides. You raise a valid point, but I don't think the solution to that is by giving that unilateral control from one group to another. I think it's removing that unilateral control entirely.
Right, but for instance, my biggest concern with NAGPRA, although you turn very much to the artifacts and to the suppression, and for both sides hitting points, my biggest point with NAGPRA, and that's where I'm intending to focus, as you know, is on the fact that we are seeing from these websites, we have the text, but the images are gone. We go to the libraries and the books are gone. We go to the museums and the artifacts are gone.
Yep.
So this is not the native people doing this. This is probably not even the archaeologists doing this. This is a group of organization, an organized group that is in control of these situations. Can be the museum curator or could be above from that, because they all have to report up. And I'm again using the example of the Mount Pigash, because that's what we've seen. We have these results and they immediately go up and say, look, I've got this result. What should I do? Suppress it, eradicate it, hide the
Right.
material, right? And in case of the natives, since I don't know any examples, can you provide any examples where the natives that suppress the information from us, that are causing the same rifts that this deletion of material and remove from site is causing?
So yes and no. So yeah, like I get what you're saying, but archaeologists do have a role that they're playing here. Native Americans do have a role that they're playing here. And yes, the curators have their role as well, as does the government. Okay, all of these are playing in, and it's not just like I'm not sitting here trying to blame the Native Americans or
Yeah,
it
I'm
is
just trying to
it is
understand. I'm
right,
not
right. No,
accusing. Yeah, yeah.
I know. I'm just trying to explain it, and it's a complicated thing
Yes.
to answer. Um, so again, like I was highlighting earlier with that article, is that NAGPRA has been created in a way that it entirely allows for abuse. It entirely allows for abuse from the curators, from the archaeologists, from the Native Americans. And so, and there's no safeguards against that at all. And anyone who speaks out against that, whether, regardless of what group they're a part of, they risk facing extreme backlash, the likes of which Elizabeth Weiss has faced. So, it only takes one bad actor in any one of those steps of the process, the government process, the institution process, the Native American process, right? It only takes one bad actor to, throw things off and erase things and remove things. And so again, it's not like I'm trying to focus on the Native Americans and going, we need to restrict their power and leave everything else intact.
Sure.
No, I'm saying that all of this needs to be done away with, right? There shouldn't be, at any step of the process, there shouldn't be anyone who should be able to step up and go, hey, I don't like this, so you need to get rid of it. And then that's what happens, because currently that is how it works.
Sure.
And it needs to not. And that's, again, applicable to the natives, to the archaeologists, and to the institutions and the
Yeah, but
government.
I have no doubts there is lobbies within certain representatives of the indigenous peoples on this group, right? That probably are not defending the natives as they should. So that's why I defend that, since we cannot trust one side, and as you are pointing, there are also problems with the other side, the side of the natives. What I propose is, considering that academically it's very difficult, because we see this in all disciplines, it's very difficult for them to break through the constraints to get out of the narrative that they present. It would be easier to create, it might be a bit idyllic, but to create a new group, then instead of being operated by academics, it is operated by indigenous peoples that have some academic background and could, from a perspective of their own that is not limited by dates, by narratives, by story, could help to regulate this situation forward, to bring this back to the public, to allow that archaeologists comes and do the research but give the materials to them, and as you explained, that this is all posted time by time, transparent to the people, to the public. So because I don't believe that the group that exists now can be reformed,
I agree. Yeah.
so something
I
new has
agree
to
with
be
it can't be
stored.
reformed. Yeah.
It has to be created something new in order to start anew. It doesn't mean that in 5 years we don't have the same problem because lobbies kept accumulating, right? But something has to be done now to reverse this, because I believe that in 10 years, people, the new generations, will not know who are the Native Americans, because they don't see it in schools, they don't see it in museums, they don't see it in anywhere. Even in the web, everything is disappearing, right?
I
I do actual constant research on these matters, and I see only text. Images that I saw a few months back are now gone from the site. It's
yeah.
just a blank.
This only moves in one direction, and I agree with you that in 10 years, yeah, people will like, what's a Native American? Like, that'll probably be a question that people ask, not even ironically. The issue, though, is that I don't understand why that control should be given to an ethnic group, or a whatever you want to call them or refer to them as. Like, um, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And especially, I think there's a couple delineations that can be made here, right? There's post-Columbian. Okay, so before Columbus arrived to America, one that's much more recent, right? The last 500 years, there's emotions within archaeology, right? And I've had people try and ask me this silly question when I talk about NAGPRA. They go, "Would you like it if someone dug up your grandparents and put them on display?" And I mean, I have honestly a very abnormal opinion on this. My brother and I discussed this conversation many times. It's like, do you care what happens when you die? And both of us are of the mindset that, like, feed our bodies to the dogs and play soccer with our head. We don't care. We're dead, right? So I know that's not a typical response. So, but I understand the response that, yeah, that's a very uncomfortable thing. You don't want your family members on display and things like that. So there's a recency. There's a time aspect, a very important time aspect to all of this. And the more recent you get, the more sensitive these things become. And I do understand that. And so, I while I personally don't have these feelings, I do understand that most normal people do. And I can understand why we might treat something that's more recent differently than we would treat something that's older, except we're not treating them any differently. We are now treating the most ancient things in the exact same way that we're treating our grandparents,
Sure.
right? And that does not make sense. And so I think if you do want to have something like you're describing for post-Columbian archaeology, that might be more appropriate, right? And I might even be able to get on board with that. But when we're talking about ancient history, when we're talking about pre-Columbian history, and especially, like 10,000-year-old history, no, why the hell would we ever just give that and just go, this is yours, you have like, that's insane to me. And we don't demand that for any other group, like the pagans and the Romans. We just, because that's obviously insane. I think it's equally insane to do that for indigenous.
I say this because I believe that indigenous peoples would be more inclined, because I believe that to understand a period in time, we need to understand not only the landscape that they had, but also the mindscape that they had. And the natives are much closer to that mindscape than us to understand
Certainly
that.
for post-Columbian history, for 10,000 years ago, I'd say probably, maybe not. I don't know, like, it's 10,000 years ago.
Yes, I understand you, but they are more connected to nature, and we know that these people were highly connected to nature. We see the alignments, we see the type of structures that they build. So it's debatable, and I understand what you're saying. But I give you the example of Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, there's a lot of material. It's probably the largest concentration of mounds in the Americas, or close to it. And yet, according to what I know, indigenous people or anyone can do anything there. You can even test the soil. They don't allow you to test the soil even. So the academics control the entire structure that is indeed native and recent. It's probably 600 years old, 800 years old, right? It's there. It's their culture. And we see the mounds are covered with vegetation, with trees that is damaging the site. It's not kept. It's not shown. It's hidden. You go to the trails, you see nothing but the sign saying that there was a mound here, right? Things are being destroyed by plants that are not supposed to be inside in top of the mounds. You see gatherings of people, weddings, this and that being done on top of these mounds, on this ancient culture, and they have no control over it. So it's one of the areas that I would say should be indigenous people taking care of what is theirs, right, and maintaining it beautiful for us to go visit and learn, right?
That's
That's what I'm coming from. That's what I'm.
Yeah, that's an understandable perspective. By the way, for the audience sake, he was saying nobody can do anything. He was saying cannot. It sounded like can to me, so I was a little confused. But you were saying
sure.
Nobody can do any. They can't do anything. They can't do anything.
I'm self-taught in English, so I apologize.
No, you're fine. I was just clarifying that in Wisconsin, you're not allowed to test the dirt. You're not allowed to do these things.
Anything.
Yeah, no one can do anything, right?
Anything at all. Anything at all. And it's not the natives. And this we know, it belongs to them. We even know which tribes belong to those sites or should be in control of those sites, right?
Right. So, and again, I think there's a difference. I think there is a difference when you can make an actual real association to a modern tribe. I'm not sitting here saying that, like, no, this should all be taken from them. They shouldn't have any access. They shouldn't have any of this stuff. Like, that's not my position. But, with this update, they've made it so that everything must be affiliated. Nothing can. So there's tribes that no longer exist. There's tribes that also do still exist that aren't federally recognized.
Exactly.
And everything that they actually, are affiliated with, they're legally not allowed to be affiliated with. It must forcibly be affiliated to a federally recognized tribe instead, and same thing with all of these ancient things. And I think that's ridiculous. I'm not saying that there should be no affiliation, that Native Americans should have no say or influence or anything like that. But I think we need to delineate from actual reasonable affiliations and more modern things and everything else.
Sure. When I say that the natives should have control, I mean the group should include archaeologists, should include people from all sides, but they should say this is ours, or this is too old for us. We don't know what this is, so you can have control over that, right? At least safeguard the possibility that it's theirs. I'm not saying it's all theirs, because you already explained that it isn't, right? So there's a lot of things they don't even recognize.
But that gets quite complicated if with the system that we have now, which is by default, it's theirs. And before any investigation is even done, they get to decide that it's theirs and what investigation gets done. So, you have to investigate these things. You have to study these things to even determine these affiliations. And right now you're cut off before you even get to that point. So,
and this,
but the research needs to be done. And if the affiliation is reasonably made, I can get on board with, I think there needs to be a discussion about exactly what that control means, but I'm certainly not against it wholesale.
But I would ask you, because you know for sure this better than I do. Do you really think that this information is getting to the indigenous people, and they are saying no, you can't do anything right there? There are
Sometimes,
there are cases
sometimes,
where that
yes,
actually happens, and you
yes.
think they do that because they want to hide it, or they know that they are going to desecrate it or have no respect for the site?
I think it's a multitude of factors. I think that assuming the anecdote I shared earlier is true, which I myself don't know that it's true. It was a story a dude told me at a bar, right? But in that case, yes, that would be them. The motivation would seem to be them hiding something that they didn't want found. And you look at Kennewick Man, I think you see the same thing there, right? It did not have these close genetic relations to modern Native Americans. A lot of tribes want those studies pulled from public. They want that hidden. They don't want people to know that. So yes, there are certainly examples of that happening. I also believe that a certain portion of Native Americans, they are very anti-American. They hate America, and understandably so. The right, but they it's coming from a place of anger, and it's they don't want the evil white man to have access to these things. They don't want them to feel like their history is being stolen and put on display as a circus for these evil oppressive white men. And whether or not that's what's actually happening, I certainly don't view it as a circus. I just want to learn, right? But that is where they're coming from. Again, this is a portion. This, I'm not saying
Sure.
this broadly speaking, but there are, just like in every group of people, there's people all across the spectrum, and that exists in Native Americans as well. As far as their distrust of archaeology, that is also a very real aspect of it. Archaeologists have not in the past always behaved in good faith. There have been a lot of really shady things that have happened. And so there is, again, an understandable level of distrust. Now, I do take some issue with that because that doesn't exist anymore. When it comes to archaeology, archaeology is so captured by this woke ideology. They are so desperate to bend over backwards for anything any Native American says or does, and never ever contradict or insult or disagree with a Native American, that like that fear of mismanagement. And I guess you have the Pisgah site, so I guess I can't unilaterally say it truly never
Sure.
happens, but I don't think that's a broad problem anymore. I don't think that's a common problem anymore. Certainly not in the way it used to be, where there was, archaeologists who are going, these people are savages. They don't, why would I take the opinion of a savage? And like, this is ours. We are taking this. Like, that used to be the mentality of certain archaeologists, was like, yes, this is ours. We own this now. And I do get why there is some distrust there, but I think that very largely those types of attitudes and opinions and actions do not exist in archaeology in America anymore today. So I think that um, while I can understand where it's coming from, I would hope that they'd be able to understand that, maybe these extreme reactions are no longer needed, because that extreme thing you're reacting to is in the past and not the present now.
Sure. Well, uh, I will finish and leave you to this, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.
I would just say that in sum, what we need is an unbiased group of control that is able to determine
And
this is
that's
native,
the tall
this
order.
is this is not native, and who studies it. And I think who studies it should be ruled by a multidisciplinary group that includes both
Absolutely.
natives and archaeologists, because we need the wisdom of the natives to interpret what we are seeing, right?
100%. I agree
And
with
basic
everything
and
you just said. 100%. Yeah,
basically that is my perspective on what should solve this NAGPRA problem. But it's easier said than done. So Goop, thank you very much.
yeah.
I
Thank
will
you.
leave here, and I appreciate you to letting me to speak. Okay,
No
thank
problem.
you.
All right. I'm going to read through chat one last time, and then that's the stream, fellas. You guys were active during that conversation. You guys were real active. Let's read through here. Yep, that is, certainly happening to a degree for sure. Mhm. Interesting. I That's another thing that I don't know that much about. I guess it doesn't surprise me too much, but that's interesting. Yeah, please do. It's not meant for a super in-depth understanding. It's a crash course. My article is a crash course, and then if that's interesting to you, if you go, huh, uh, this sounds rather crazy, I don't believe it, and you want to verify it, read the article I've linked in this description because it is far more thorough. It's very in-depth. It's full of citations and sources. Very, very, very good article. Or if you read it and you go, wow, this is crazy, I want to learn more about it, again, go read the article in the description of this video. Very, very good article. The best one I've found so far. That's pretty much my perspective for the most part. Yeah, I generally agree with that. I'm not sure if secret societies have too much to do with NAGPRA, but I just generally agree. Um, they did in what was it? Montana? Was it Montana? Half of Montana was returned to the Native Americans. This was several years ago at this point. Um, and yes, I mean, that could definitely be an element to all of this. But yeah, half of Montana is now under Native control. Forgive me if I'm saying the wrong state, but I'm pretty sure it's Montana. Mm. Okay. Looks like you guys are just chatting amongst yourself. I think I've addressed all of the questions. So thank you guys for tuning in. Are they Mayan? Are they Aztec? Are they Ojibwe? We don't know. Yeah. Okay. I think I answered all the questions. So thank you guys for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Do check out the article in the description. I'm not sure when my next episode will be, but tune in on Sundays at 5 p.m. That's when it'll be when it happens. Peace out, fellas.